Hello and welcome back to the Two Sats Show. I'm joined today by Solo Satoshi, or Matt, and he is the biggest seller and distributor of BitAxe home mining rigs. I'm super stoked to have Matt on the podcast today. They're doing amazing work over at Solo Satoshi, and I couldn't be more excited to get his two sats on all things Bitcoin mining. Matt, how you doing today?
I'm doing good, man. A little wet outside, a little cold, but hanging in there.
I know you're driving, heading back from somewhere, and you're pulled over on the side of the road doing this with us. So that's much appreciated, man. Much appreciated.
No problem, man.
So let's just jump right into it. People are starting to catch on to what's happening with Solo Satoshi, with BitAxe, but they're curious. They have a ton of questions. So can you kind of first just start off by giving me your Bitcoin mining origin story? How did you get involved in all of this?
Yeah, so I've been in Bitcoin for probably about 5 or 6 years now. Really took the deep dive about 4 years ago and went all in just with the economy and kind of everything you've seen during COVID, and really just took the deep dive, started reading, and eventually came to the conclusion one day that you may not always be able to use an exchange to acquire Bitcoin. If Bitcoin ever became a threat by the federal government, the US government, that they might shut down exchanges. And that really frightened me. It would be very bad for anyone trying to get in. And it kind of led me into mining, because mining is definitely one way to acquire some sats. However, I was looking at the big, what I would call now, industrial mining rigs, like the big Bitmains. And at the time, it was the S19 XPs. They were super expensive, super loud, super hot. So in order to run a large unit like that, you basically have to have a dedicated area, whether it be a garage, a shed, or something like that. And, when I started looking into the cost of everything, I would have had to upgrade the main breaker to my house, take an outage from the utility company. I would have had to add another breaker downstream to be able to supply, the current to all these big rigs, and insulate it and air condition it, because the colder they are, the more efficient they run, the better they perform. I was already into the tens of thousands of dollars. It wasn't a good cost factor. A lot of startup costs, a lot of headache, a lot of inconveniences there, and it just wasn't feasible to mine Bitcoin at home on a level that would be somewhat profitable. And I tell you what, man, I'm glad I didn't do it, because mining Bitcoin today is very competitive, and it doesn't pay itself off if you don't have those cheap, those industrial rates like a lot of these industrial miners do. But I found BitAxe in the midst of all that, and that's exactly why I'm here today. I thought it was really the next best thing when I plugged one into the wall, and it came right on. I followed some simple instructions, and I was a Bitcoin miner in 5 minutes. And this device, it just sat on my desktop running, man. Tinkered around with it, played with it, learned how to overclock it. And like I said, I knew this was the next best thing the moment I plugged it in and got it online.
Man, that's really cool, and that's revolutionary, really, and that's why I'm so excited to kind of dive deeper with you. Because a lot of people, I think the average Bitcoiner, they just stack sats. They don't really spend a whole lot of time researching the intricacies of mining Bitcoin, right? They just buy it and they hold it. But with the BitAxe, it allows the everyday Bitcoiner to just begin mining at home for what I feel is an extremely affordable price without a ton of know-how. As you and I know, like Bitcoin mining is largely centralized to massive mining conglomerates across the world. Why should the everyday sat stacker take an interest in this and begin mining with the BitAxe?
Well, it's fairly simple. If you ultimately care about Bitcoin, if Bitcoin is your currency or method of saving, if that's your choice, your method of choice, you have no choice but to support open source mining and what BitAxe stands for, because miners today have totally centralized Bitcoin mining. Majority of the hash rate is controlled by Ant Pool, F2 Pool, Foundry, a lot of the really, really large players. and it's significant. And even some of the smaller pools have been found to be proxies for ant pool. So Bitcoin mining today is highly, highly centralized, and it's the way the blocks get populated. It's the way transactions, you know, it's the method of which transactions get prioritized. They could try and 1% attack the network, and while we could fork off and node runners can do their thing, we know that no one could really take over the network, right? We could always fork it off, but I feel like that would set Bitcoin back decades, and we would have to gain that trust all over again. And then there's the other aspect of censoring transactions or prioritizing transactions over other transactions. Now, you could prioritize your transaction today with a higher fee, but miners have the ability to prioritize whichever transactions they deem. And it's a big threat to anyone who holds Bitcoin and believes it to really be freedom money. And BitAxe was created to be in opposition to that. On a lot of our devices, you see the anarchy A, and we always said from the beginning that BitAxe stands for anarchy. BitAxe doesn't follow any rules. It's totally against the hierarchy, that Bitcoin mining has really established today. And it's just a resistance against what's starting to be a centralized system.
Absolutely. So that really kind of highlights the critical importance of getting off of the sidelines as a Bitcoiner. If you really care about freedom money, if you really care about things more than, hey, the numbers going up, prices going up, this is all about decentralization versus centralization, from what I'm hearing.
Absolutely. BitAxe has always been about decentralization. Sure, there's a possibility that you can hit a block and get a very large payout, but at its core, the ethos behind BitAxe is of decentralization.
That's awesome. So can you tell me just a bit more about how running a BitAxe contributes to the overall health and security of the Bitcoin network, and also how these centralized miners can override the average person by paying to have their transactions processed sooner?
Yeah, so right now, BitAxe, in the grand scheme of things, and it all depends on how many devices get distributed and how fast this catches on, but BitAxe right now, as a single ASIC chip miner, is insignificant in the market amongst giants. But that's at this moment. BitAxe is an open source project, and ever since a BitAxe did find its first block, it started to attract a lot of people throughout the Bitcoin space that know firmware and hardware. It started to attract the professionals. When a BitAxe found a block, it really turned some heads and raised some eyebrows, and people said, hey, this can really be a thing. This can really happen. Well, the goal is with BitAxe is to distribute enough hash power globally to throw that balance off, to get more than 51% of the network back just to home miners, right? Because when Bitcoin mining, or when Bitcoin was first launched and when you downloaded it to your computer was a miner. It was truly decentralized. Anyone running the code or the software was mining Bitcoin. Well, today it's turned into an industrial application where if you don't have cheap power, or if you don't have hundreds of thousands or maybe millions of dollars, I mean, these guys are spending millions of dollars on these facilities, you can't participate in the network. And that's completely unacceptable. It's not okay by any means. So when you run a BitAxe, you're taking, right now, the latest and greatest BitAxe is 1.2 terahashes per second. Every time you run a BitAxe device, you're essentially taking back a small portion of what was ours to begin with.
Right. So this centralized mining stuff is the antithesis of the Bitcoin ethos, to put it bluntly, right? It's not a straight up attack, but it's going against sort of the original way that, Bitcoin came into the world, which is, as you said, everybody was mining, on their home PCs, right? So the goal is to get enough BitAxes running in homes that we reach critical mass and we distribute the hash power across plebs, basically. Is that sort of correct?
Absolutely. That's the overall ethos, is to take back the power and to keep it decentralized and to keep developing on these projects to make them better and better, to where we continuously strip hash power away from the centralized forces that are pretty much controlling things today.
That's awesome. Yeah, and this is where education is so key, right? because a lot of people are just stacking their sats, they're buying, they're hodling, maybe they're selling, but they're not really looking at, the 5, 10, 15, 20 years down the line when, this is a global phenomenon. Everybody wants to have a piece of this pie, not only holding Bitcoin, but perhaps mining Bitcoin. So having this now, having it be open source is really how I think we're going to reach critical mass, where like this is back in the hands of the people and not these giant mining corporations.
Yes, I agree with that 100%. I think as time goes on, BitAxe catches on more. I think as the project is further developed on and multi-chip units start to come out and be available to retail, I think all of this starts to become more realistic to everyone all at one time. Just like everything else, man. A lot of people don't notice things when it's in the development or the beginning stages. But like I said, when I first plugged my BitAxe in, I knew that this project had a ton of power. I knew its potential immediately. And that's really the visionary, side of me. I could see 10, 20, 30 years into the future of everyone having a device in their home that's mining Bitcoin. It doesn't matter what that device is, because there's going to be forks of the BitAxe project, and hopefully they stay open source, because that would be terrible if someone took the technology and tried to go close source with it. But there's going to continuously be people developing on this project and making it better for years to come. And it's never going to be perfect. It's never going to be in its final form. There's always going to be a more powerful chip or a better way to do things, a more efficient way to do things. But for years and years to come, this is a project that will continue to be developed on, and it will continue to attract professionals to the space that further innovate on the idea and make it all possible.
Yeah, I've really noticed that the innovation is happening at a rapid pace with BitAxe. You have people doing all sorts of very interesting and creative and innovative things with their BitAxes. With solar mining, for an example. That's one that I'm personally really curious about. Living in Mexico, having maybe rain once in a year, if that, here where I'm at, really makes the prospect of renewable energy mining, solo mining with the BitAxe, a very interesting prospect. So I think that, like you said, there's going to continue to be an inflow of geniuses, of rebels, of plebs that really come in here and put their spin on it. And as long as it stays open source, we're looking at something that can fundamentally change the entire landscape of Bitcoin and Bitcoin mining. Is that sort of how you feel?
Yeah, so I have this slogan that I always say, and I feel like eventually they're going to write books about what's going on right now. It's just really so early, and it hasn't made a large enough dent to really catch the minds, or the attention rather, of a lot of the big influencers in this space. It feels like a lot of people mostly focus on price. And while that's important, Bitcoin at its core, whether it's running a node or running a miner, is also very important. It's arguably more important than the price. The thing about open source is that the files are available for everyone, which means that if someone takes a look at someone's project and they happen to know more, if their area of expertise is a little bit better than the person who developed it, then everything's right there. They can change it. They can submit changes and make the project better. So that doesn't happen with proprietary technology, or it might over time, but it takes so long because it's centralized entities. It needs approval. It has to go through this person and that person. And then Their development time's very slow. This is a space that's going to continue to develop over light speed because this is a global effort to decentralize Bitcoin mining. And while one side of the world is asleep, the other side of the world is awake and continuously working on the project. It's a global phenomenon, a 24/7 development process. It's going to exponentially grow. Right now, what you're witnessing in the early stages is the early adoption stage, the network effect, the network technology effect that we see on every new emerging technology. Not that this is technically new technology, but the technology's now been released, open source to everyone. So now everyone can contribute and participate and continuously make it better for years to come.
That was really brilliantly said. And you really pointed out there in the distinction between the centralization and the decentralization when you were speaking just now about, changes might occur with these proprietary, mining operations or technologies, but it takes forever. And, that's akin to the bureaucracy we see when we try to go to the bank or send money through these traditional fiat rails. There's nothing but hoops to jump through, whereas this is plug and play and get busy changing the world, right?
Absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
there there's very minimum there's very minimum time setting this device up. Essentially, you get it out of the box, you plug it in. There's a little bit of learning curve right now with IP addresses. I'm a high voltage technician. I do substation communication and protocols on things, and I mess with a lot of relays. So it's kind of second nature to me to know what an IP address is, but it took me a long time though to know what an IP address is and what it does. And those things moving forward with development aren't going to be as hard. This is going to get easier to use over time. We're going to go from paying with a check to paying with a debit card or Apple Pay. The advancements that this space is going to see rapidly is going to blow people's minds, and it's going to catch them all of a sudden, just like Bitcoin did. When Bitcoin first came out, a lot of people, they were opposed to it. They didn't like it. They said it wouldn't work. They laughed at it. They said it was a joke. And look today, $100,000 Bitcoin. I wish it was lower. I don't like when Bitcoin's price is high. We stay, everything's just kind of hectic right now. But it's really gonna blow up in people's faces one day, and they'll catch on to it. They'll catch on to it. Everyone's gonna get in at the time where they're comfortable. But what you see today is not what you're gonna see over the next 5 years, I would say. I mean, it's not gonna be what you see next year. It's gonna grow at lightning pace. You're not gonna be able to keep up. I am fully immersed in this space. I try to keep up with everything, and I still have a hard time keeping up with it. There's so many people working behind the scenes. Some of them are well known. Some of them don't care to be known, rightfully so. A lot of these open source developers, they just like to do the work. They don't want to take the credit. They don't want to be in the spotlight. They don't want to deal with retail. They want to make a revolutionary product or project and open source it to the world and let the world do with it whatever they want.
Yeah, that's very powerful. Just like Satoshi gave us Bitcoin and then went away, right? It's those kinds of philosophies or ethics, if you will, that we care about as, Bitcoin miners, Bitcoin holders for the long term. We're here because this is fundamentally rewriting history, changing the world in front of us. And we're even starting to see it, as the great Parker Lewis says, gradually then suddenly. And we're starting to see that with, politicians in Japan, tweeting about their BitAxe that they're running, or Charlie Shrem, like a lot of the OGs. People are catching on. People are definitely catching on. And like you said, maybe some of that started with the first block reward being found on a BitAxe. But I think the more people look inside and think about why they're really participating in this network, the more it's going to become glaringly obvious why they need to run at least one BitAxe at home.
Yeah, the Japanese politician putting that tweet out really just kind of just goes to show, right? And then you have OGs running BitAxe because they understand fundamentally that it's not about what one BitAxe can do. It's about what millions of BitAxes can do. sure, your odds are slim to none if you run one BitAxe. But if a million devices go out, then statistically, one of those devices will start to hit. BitAxe will statistically start to hit more frequently. And the moment it does that, more ears are going to perk up, more eyebrows are going to raise. It's going to bring more people into the space, more units get distributed, and it happens all over again, even faster the next time. And it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's something that's going to continue to happen, whether people listening believe or don't believe. You're going to start to hear of solo miners hitting blocks more frequently because of the statistic aspect of it, right? It's a game of statistics, possibilities. And the more hash rate goes out, the more hash rate we have, I don't want to say control over, but the more hash rate that's distributed amongst plebs, and the more frequently plebs will actually start to find blocks.
Yeah, and I think that's sort of right back to the nature of Bitcoin and shows why this is so inseparable, right? It's supposed to be decentralized and in the hands of the everyday person and not these large conglomerates. So I think BitAxe is the clear standard for being able to start returning hash power and not, like you said, not control of the network, but just decentralization of the network to the everyday. So that's very, very powerful stuff. So as I understand it, Matt, like there's two ways you can set up one of these BitAxes, right? You can set up as a solo miner, right? Like a forever lottery ticket. You know, a block is mined every 10 minutes somewhere in the world. You have a chance of mining that block. And then you can also mine with a pool. So could you just elaborate about the importance or the process of that? And what's the different benefits or drawbacks that one person might consider when they're choosing how to set up their BitAxe with a pool or individually?
Yeah, sure. So if you purchase a BitAxe and you point it towards a pool, I would argue that Ocean is one of the good guys. They're doing fantastic things over there with the new release of Datum and people being able to generate their own block templates. I think that's very important for solo miners or just home miners in general. But if you buy this device and you point it toward Brains or any other pool, you're in no way making a difference. That's not what the project was intended to do. You're free to do, whatever you please. It's your device, but just know that if you point your hash rate toward one of those centralized or proxy ant pools, that you're just contributing 1 terahash or however much hash power you control. You're giving that to a centralized pool. And there really aren't a whole lot of benefits of doing so. You may get a nickel or 6 cents or 7 cents per day if you're doing lightning payouts. If you go to a larger pool that does strictly on-chain payouts, you'll likely never get a payout. It may be years and years and years because of the fee you have to pay to move it, right? A BitAxe won't even generate enough Bitcoin to pay the fee just to move it. But there's really something to be said with solo mining, because when you solo mine, you're stripping that power away from those guys, right? You're pointing your hash rate or your power in a different direction, which opposes them and ultimately increases the difficulty of them hitting their next reward.
That is extremely insightful and powerful. I think a lot of people don't get that distinction and might not understand how that flies in the face of what we're trying to do here by solo mining or by home mining with the BitAxe. So that's extremely educational in that sense. So hopefully when people buying their BitAxe consider what you just said and solo mine only, because contributing to centralized pools is, yeah, exactly what you were saying is the opposite of what we're trying to achieve here. So that's fascinating.
Yeah,
Um,
and keep in mind these devices, like the first iterations we're seeing, the single chip boards, they're only going to cost, I mean, less than $5 a month to run. If you're in a state that has high utility costs, or if you're in a country that has high utility costs, You can almost think of that extra utility cost as maybe a small tax to have financial sovereignty and freedom and have Bitcoin thrive as your savings or transaction mechanism of choice. You know, I look at freedom. I'm very big on freedom, a big time freedom advocate. I hate the system. I hate all of the rules. I'm anarchy, right? Like I just want to live my life and people leave me alone. But in the grand scheme of things, if I had a chance to buy freedom for $100 a month, just say, or be a slave to the system, I would pay $100 a month to be free. If it had to be that way. So think about that extra $2 or $5 each month. I know times are hard and a lot of people suffering from inflation and a lot of people just trying to get the sats. But think about that little extra utility cost, which it's the equivalent to maybe leaving your porch light on all year. Think about that. I think in the grand scheme of things, it's a very small fee that serves a greater purpose ultimately.
Yeah, well put. To your point, if you're suffering from inflation and, hard times in the economy and all these things, like the way out of that, the hope that we have is Bitcoin. So paying to run a miner and to run a node is just doing your part to ensure that we do reach that financial sovereignty and a more freedom-based, freedom-focused world that people like you and I want to see. So
Absolutely.
there's no downside to doing what we're talking about here, right? If you care about sovereignty, be it financial or just, as a human being in the world that you live and work and transact in, the way out of this quagmire, this sinking ship that we're all on with fiat is through Bitcoin. And this helps ensure that Bitcoin thrives and stays around forever and gives us those outcomes.
Yeah, the miners and the nodes are the protectors of the network, right? So if you're stacking sats, if you believe that Bitcoin is everything you think it to be, then you should definitely run a Bitcoin miner at your home and solo mine it. And BitAxe makes it so affordable, so easy that you'd almost be crazy not to do it if you're a Bitcoiner at heart. If you're a true Bitcoiner at heart, I would say it's kind of crazy not to run at least one. It could be a single chip unit. Like I said, it seems rather insignificant, but in the grand scheme of things, as more units get distributed out to the world, every terahash matters. Every hash matters. This effort that we have going.
Yeah, I think a lot of times, man, people they can't look past the price. They can't look past their own nose and like what's happening right in front of them to see that they have to care enough to contribute to something bigger. If they want this to succeed and they want it to be around, running a BitAxe is almost an obligation. I don't want to shill too hard for you here, but I really believe that in my heart of hearts that this is not just about profit in any way. This is about securing the network and securing financial sovereignty and freedom across the board for Bitcoiners, and then for all the people on the outside looking in that will eventually catch on to Bitcoin as time goes by. So I think it's almost a duty, and I'm really looking forward to running mine and hopefully a whole bunch of them here soon in Mexico, where it's definitely not caught on in terms of mining. But you mentioned, Matt, like, it's really affordable to run at least one, and that everybody should be running, at least one. And I would definitely agree. But you've also mentioned to me, before that there's controversy around sort of the pricing and the dollar cost per terahash compared to these larger miners. Just dive into that a little bit for us. Like, what is that controversy, and how is it misleading?
So there's a lot of things going on here that ultimately set the end price of a BitAxe. I would say one of the largest contributors to that is the chokehold of ASIC chips. So pretty much all of the ASIC chips in the world come from one portion of the world, and they're generally distributed to one other country, and that country basically controls all of the Bitcoin mining technology. You have big players like Bitmain, Bitdeer, all these huge ASIC manufacturers that are acting like gatekeepers of ASIC chips, and there's no way to buy these ASIC chips loose. So, if you were building a home computer and you were looking for a hard drive or some storage device to save all your files to it or whatever you were doing, you could go buy them wholesale. You could find a distributor, buy them wholesale. Well, you can't buy ASIC chips like that. Very, very controlled, very big chokehold it has on the entire open source mining, just community and development process. And it's ultimately what controls a lot of the price of a BitAxe. If ASIC chips were more affordable, you might see BitAxes come down 25 to 50%. And in the grand scheme of things, all of that is because of the gatekeepers that are essentially holding the ASICs. There's no way to get, if you wanted 1,000 ASIC chips to start trying to manufacture these devices tomorrow, you have to actually buy an entire Bitmain unit, strip it down to just the hash boards, or find someone out there who's selling hash boards and remove all the heat sinks and manually take each chip off. That's currently how these devices are being manufactured. It's a tedious process. It's a very time-consuming process, and it adds up over time. You have labor and to do all of that. If you could just buy ASICs like buttons loose, then it would cut down on a lot of that cost. But there's a lot of gatekeeping going on. The ASIC market's very centralized. It's proprietary technology. That's the only thing proprietary on a BitAxe that's not open source. But hopefully as time goes on, there are some things in the works to bring those prices down. If we get ASIC manufacturing in the United States up and going, I think we see prices drop by a lot, and I think that lowers the barrier to entry even further. But in the grand scheme of things, are not the controversy is that they're marked up, 5-10 times what they're really worth. They're not. It's just the chokehold that the ASIC market has on the open source development and just manufacturing of these devices.
So is the ASIC manufacturer in bed with these giant mining corporations? Is that sort of what you're saying?
I believe the large Bitcoin mining manufacturers, I believe they have proprietary technology that they submit to semiconductor manufacturers, and they get their chips developed, and they spend millions of dollars doing this. These are the large fiat bros that we're up against, right? They have these huge companies. They get issued to them at the push of a button. They leverage it, and they keep growing to try and outcompete everyone. No one in this space is leveraging any debt. Solo Satoshi, we're 100% owned. Me and Hunter own Solo Satoshi. We started this effort up, and we started this with our money, and we grow purely organically. It's a grassroots company. It all started with word of mouth and X posting, and it has its downsides of not having investors. You can't grow as fast. You can't get people to develop for you as fast. There's a lot of downsides, but ultimately at the end of the day, we call our own shots, and that's where we want to keep it.
Yeah, and that's in the spirit with, all of the decentralized principles and the things that we've been talking about this whole podcast. So I really respect that you're doing it the right way and you're letting it go where it goes through open source. And you can really see how those centralized mining companies, like the chokehold that they have on these ASICs, I mean, that should really illustrate to the listeners just how big of a threat that is to what we love with Bitcoin, right? Like the need for us to start to decentralize that hash power and get it in the hands of the everyday Bitcoiner, because this if they have that level of control, this is no different than any of these other centralized fiat systems that we're trying to fight against, right? So it's super important that we buy something like a BitAxe and support the grassroots movement and the grassroots cypherpunk philosophy.
Yes. And as I've said, BitAxe is ultimately a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's going to grow exponentially. It's going to catch the eyes of investors and influential people and people who do have the funding to develop an ASIC chip, because no one at our level, just, I guess what you could say, just regular people, we don't have access to that sort of funding to try and develop or manufacture an ASIC chip by any means. I mean, we're talking about millions of dollars. This is a very proprietary technology, and that's why it's ultimately hoarded, by Bitmain and all the other large Bitcoin mining manufacturers.
That's important and it's powerful stuff. Yeah, for sure. That's a fascinating sort of backstory and educational bit about the real dangers that we're facing. Like maybe they can't network attack, 51% attack the network, but it still goes against everything Bitcoin is about to let them have that level of control when there are alternatives in something like BitAxe. It really goes to show just how important it is for everyone to consider this and invest in something like this if it's something that they care about seeing in the future, secure, sovereign, free resistance money, if you will, with Bitcoin.
Yeah,
So can you
and
explain a bit about, sorry, go ahead.
yeah, I was gonna say, 51% attack, it could be highly unlikely. That's just one small percentage of like what can ultimately happen, but it's the transaction censorship, and it's the government regulations that these large miners are under ultimately. These companies, they get so big, they get so powerful, and they're under direct control of the government. And that's another reason why it's important that we get hash power to all Bitcoiners abroad, because if something was to happen and the government shut these large facilities down, then Bitcoin's hash rate could be very vulnerable if we don't have a large portion of hash rate either. So there's a lot of things that could potentially happen. Again, it's all speculation, but a part of staying ahead of the curve is thinking ahead like that and
Yeah, don't
actually
wait
doing
for
something
it to
about it.
happen. Yeah, don't
Exactly.
wait for it to happen because, that's a great point about the government because as we can all tell, as Bitcoiners, we know that this is something that they are becoming more and more involved in. If you can't beat them, join them, right? And, with this potential strategic national Bitcoin reserve in the United States and just governments hate giving up control. We know this, right? And so it's important to get ahead of this. It's important to separate ourselves from the ability to be attacked or brought down on the Bitcoin network like that. And they're going to do ultimately what serves them best, not what serves us best, not what serves you best as a citizen, as a Bitcoiner. As much as they like to dress it up and talk nicely about it now, if you've been paying attention over the last 10 to 15 years, they've done nothing but talk poorly about Bitcoin, right? So it's not out of left field to expect that they might try something at some point, right? To centralize control even further. Is that a fear that you
Yeah.
have?
Yeah, I mean, it's all about special interest, right? And if there isn't any special interest today, there doesn't mean that there won't be special interest tomorrow. And at a moment's notice, they can get told to point their hash rate wherever or do whatever they're told with their hash rate. Again, it's all special interests, and these guys are in the pockets of the government, and the government controls all their funding. Ultimately, they'll debank them or deplatform them if they don't do what they say. We've seen this. We've seen this time and time again with other businesses, and it applies to this more than ever. If Bitcoin really starts to be an attack on the dollar, or if they can't control it the way they want to control it, you know, they'll by executive order tell those large facilities to point their hash rate wherever or do whatever. And it's a really big concern, and that's that's a large reason of why I'm here, of why I speak highly and pretty loudly about BitAxe. I think me just speaking very loudly about BitAxe contributed a lot to Solo Satoshi's success, because I don't think there were a whole lot of people besides the developers and the people inside of Open Source Miners United that were really concerned about this, until BitAxe was actually a thing. These guys understood this early on. They realized the risk that this poses to Bitcoin, and they started to do something about it. And when I seen the effort there, started to it made perfect sense to me. And when I got my first BitAxe plugged in, I was hooked. And at the time, BitAxes were over $300 when I bought my first device. And that's important, because when we got into the space, we set the bar high as far as lowering costs. A lot of the people who have been in the BitAxe space, they know this, and that's the people that we need to know this. The people who are supposed to know what we've done, have done, they understand it. And we've brought BitAxe prices down incredibly, and we're going to continue putting pressure on the market, driving costs down, because we know the cost is the biggest barrier to entry for everyone. So if that barrier is lowered even more, then we get more devices out there. BitAxes start finding blocks more often, and the self-fulfilling prophecy just continues.
Absolutely. Brilliantly put. And, with increasing interest in Bitcoin from governments, then we get things like regulation, right? And that's ultimately what BitAxe is allowing you to kind of protect against. I know a lot of places in Europe, if you start investing in Bitcoin mining, that becomes a business. I think in Germany, I have a friend that, he's going to be buying a BitAxe because he can run that from the privacy of his own home. Nobody knows he's doing it. Nobody, that kind of a line of thought, right? Whereas if he goes and puts a miner in an industrial operation, then now it's considered a business, which is crazy. So, this really does allow us to have, freedom of choice and freedom of transacting and interacting with the network. So this is extremely powerful stuff. And man, I really would love to have you on for a round two at this point, because there's so much more that we can get into
We could
about
talk
all
for
of this
weeks.
stuff.
I know, it's so
Absolutely.
interesting. It's so interesting what's going on. I call it the open source Bitcoin mining revolution. They're going to write books on this. What we're a part of right now. We're witnessing a huge milestone in Bitcoin's history. It's about as important as the block size war, in my opinion. It's taking power back, putting it back into the hands of the people the way it should be. It's returning Bitcoin back to its decentralized ethos and making Bitcoin mining available for everyone, no matter where you are, no matter your location at all on this earth. And that's the beauty of open source, is that even if you can't afford to buy one of these devices, the files are online for you to build your own device. If you don't like the price, if you think the price is too expensive, if you don't agree with anything I'm saying, one thing you can definitely do is source all of the materials, and you can actually build one of these devices for yourself. That's the point of open sourcing it. If you just want to build one, you might have to buy some extra materials, because it's kind of hard to get one thing at a time. We're looking at doing DIY kits, because I think that is a very powerful, that itself will unlock a whole nother aspect of BitAxe. Because we have access to all the materials in bulk. So we could actually sell single DIY kits with majority of it already done, and the end user may just have to solder a few things. It'd be, great for seminars and education, and that much more important for the adoption and decentralization, because now that opens up the world to just the components, and anyone can build one anywhere in the world. This is something that cannot be regulated. There's no way to stop this. The cat is, so to say, already out of the bag. and the technology's there, and it's going to live on forever, just like Bitcoin will.
Hell yeah. That is beautiful. That is powerful stuff. That's the spirit of why I'm into Bitcoin. And I know clearly, that's why you're into Bitcoin. So I hope the people listening to this understand the importance of not just, hoping to mine a block, but sort of the philosophy and the ethos of what's being built here and what you now have access to at your fingertips. With a DIY kit, you're taking the labor away from, companies like Solo Satoshi and doing it yourself, right? And that allows that cost to come down a little bit and really leave you with no excuse not to jump in and participate in protecting the network. So I think that it's extremely selfless of you guys and really shows your intentions, just like how your customer service is top notch. You can just look all over Twitter and see that, you guys operate in an ethical way and in a way that's in alignment with what a Bitcoiner would want and expect. So, I got to give you a lot of respect and love for that, Matt. And, we'll definitely have you on for a round two, but we can dive a little bit deeper there. But just sort of, if you can, in the next few minutes here, drop us your information on Solo Satoshi. Do you ship all over the world? And what's your Twitter and what's your website? And how can people buy their first BitAxe?
Yeah, so we ship globally. We take pride on that. If you go to the checkout portion of our website, it'll generate your import fees, your custom duties, all that extra stuff that your government charges for you to get this into your country. There's also multiple BitAxe distributors around the world, and they're doing equally great things. $5 from each device purchased from us goes to the development team behind BitAxe project, and they are Open Source Miners United. You should definitely Google them and get in their Discord channel. You can really keep up with the details of what's going on. So far to date, we've donated $50,000 to OSMU from sales, and we're going to continue doing that no matter where we go with our process and developing greater technologies. BitAxe was the single chip units were the stepping stone, and we're forever grateful to OSMU. But we have a YouTube, we have a Twitter, we have an Instagram, we have a TikTok. Twitter's obviously just kind of the biggest thing because it's where everyone seems to migrate in the crypto world, in the Bitcoin world. And we're also on Nostr as well. So you can look us up on any of those platforms and give us a follow. On X, we're at Solo Satoshi. And yeah, we ship all over the world, and we love to do it because we like to put BitAxes in place where we don't think there's one at yet. So there's a couple countries we can't ship to. I know for sure one of them's Russia, just because of the U.S.-Russia conflict. And then there's another one, but I can't remember off the bat. But for the most part, we can get a BitAxe in your hands anywhere in the world. The website is solosatoshi.com, and you get a 10% discount when paying in Bitcoin. So we already try to pride ourselves on having the lowest prices in the market, but you can take it even lower when you pay with Bitcoin.
Yeah, and we'll have all of that linked in the show notes below so you can easily access that and get your own BitAxe in your hands and start contributing to securing the Bitcoin network and bringing the power back to the plebs. I encourage everybody to check out the website, check out the YouTube, check out Matt's Twitter at Solo Satoshi, and consider paying in Bitcoin. We need more Bitcoin companies that actually put their money where their mouth is and allow you to pay for their services and products with sats. So with that being said, Matt, thanks so much for giving us your 2 cents on all things decentralized Bitcoin mining. Appreciate you, brother.
Yeah, thank you for having me, man. It was a pleasure.
Yeah, we learned a lot, and I think everyone's going to be very lucky to do a deep dive on BitAxe through this episode. So we'll have you back soon for round two. Talk to you soon.
All right. Thank you.